A long-time Christian went to the big city one weekend and attended a fancy big city church. He came home and his wife asked him how it was. "Well," said the man, "it was good. They did something different, however. They sang praise songs instead of hymns." "Praise songs," said his wife, "what are those?" "Oh, they're okay. They're sort of like hymns, only different," said the man. "Well, what's the difference?" asked his wife. The man said, "Well, it's like this. If I were to say to you, 'Martha, the cows are in the corn,' well, that would be a hymn. If, on the other hand, I were to say to you, 'Martha, Martha, Martha, oh Martha, 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 the cows, the big cows, the brown cows, the black cows, the white cows, the black and white cows, the cows, cows, cows are in the corn, are in the corn, are in the corn, 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 are in the corn, are in the corn, 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 the cows are in the corn.' Then, if I were to repeat the whole thing about 7 times, well, that would be a praise song." A new Christian was visiting relatives in a small town one weekend and attended a small town church. He came home and his wife asked him how it was. "Well," said the young man, "it was good. They did something different, however. They sang hymns instead of praise songs." "Hymns?" said his wife. "What are those?" "Oh, they're okay. They're sort of like praise songs, only different," said the young man. "Well, what's the difference?" asked his wife. The young man said, "Well, it's like this. If I were to say to you, 'Martha, the cows are in the corn,' well, that would be a praise song. If, on the other hand, I was to say to you, 'O Martha, Martha, dear Martha, hear thou my cry. Turn thou thy whole wondrous ear by and by to the righteous, immutable, glorious truth. For the way of the animals is terribly uncouth. There in their heads is no shadow of sense. They sneak into my corn unless they are fenced. They have broken free their shackles, their warm pens eschewed. Then all my mild sweet corn they have utterly chewed. So look to that bright shining day by and by, where no vicious animal makes my soul cry, where all good things of the earth are reborn, and I no longer see those foul cows in the corn." Then, if I were to do only verses 1, 3 and 4, and do a key change on the last verse, well, that would be a hymn. Just a light-hearted illustration about a couple of views of worship. Today we're going to be looking at the second of the 5 practices of fruitful congregations, passionate worship. And I wonder what you think of when you think about the idea of passionate worship. Does your attending church services fit into the category of passionate worship? I know that when I think of passionate worship, I tend to think probably immediately of watching football fans at a match, a big match. They're totally worshipping their teams and they sing with passion, they speak with passion. I have to say for good or for ill at times, but they certainly are passionate about their teams. They travel all over to support them, they pay lots of money for season tickets. They're worshipping. You just have to hear them speak to know that they're speaking with a passion for that team. What's important for us is to know that it isn't just the titles of our 5 weeks of theme preaching, hospitality, worship, faith development, service, generosity, but that the adjectives that are used before each one. The adjectives make a difference because they're describing what it is that we're really doing. There's a difference between worship and passionate worship. The adjective matters. I don't know about you, but I'm sure some of us, if not a lot of us, have probably been part of boring worship or even mediocre worship, maybe even here, maybe even with me. Those are the times in which we don't feel like we've worshipped at all. And then there are the times in which we have been truly moved, in which we knew that God was present for us in that moment, in which we may have been fundamentally changed. That's what passionate worship feels like. And yet it's about so much more than that as well. It's about passionate worship. We think about the reading from Luke today and the answer that was given to the question, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And the answer comes, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbour as yourself. Before we hear anything about neighbours, we hear this call to love God with heart, soul, strength and mind. This is worship. At least that is what we hope. It's what we hope when we pray. It's what we hope when we sing songs of praise. It's what we hope when we listen to God's word. It's what we hope when we tune our hearts to hear the word proclaimed. It's what we hope when we wonder about the word and how it nudges us in our lives. It's our hope that we might be inspired to love God with heart, mind, soul and strength. Engaging our heart, our mind, our soul and our strength seems to be descriptive of passionate engagement as we invest ourselves fully, engaging our whole being, our very being in worship. Earlier on this week, I was listening to someone almost lamenting about the overly busy time that they were having, especially with ferrying children to and from football matches and clubs, etc. Could have been me when I think about it, but it wasn't. It was a friend, and it wasn't the inconvenience or the experience of having to do it. It wasn't even standing on a windy football field sideline. Rather, they were lamenting that those matches interfered with their being able to come to church. The person went on to talk about what they missed and how things fell out of sync all week. And they shared the longing they had for something that actually could not be named, but something that they experienced in worship. Worship changed things somehow, and they missed it. And as I was listening, I knew what they meant. There's something about worship, and it's hard sometimes to put into words of our own. But the psalmist had a lot to say. And I guess one example was from our call to worship in Psalm 84, where it says, better is one day in your courts than thousands elsewhere. Better is one day in your courts than thousands elsewhere. And as I think about those words and the longing they express, I wonder, do we really feel this way? Sometimes we struggle to get in touch with that longing as we come to worship, distracted or tired out or rushing about. Perhaps part of our struggle is that we forget about the purpose of worship and what we're called to do. There's been times when I've walked into church to lead a service and I've been battered by things that were being said by different people about others and about what needs to be done. How do we come to worship? In his book, 5 Practices of Fruitful Congregation, Robert Snays talked about how sometimes we come to worship with the same expectations we have of a movie or a concert or a TV show. We enter into the sanctuary, into the Holy of Holies, ready to engage in a spectator sport. He says worse yet, sometimes we come with a critical eye, looking for mistakes, counting missteps, looking at our watches to see how long that preacher goes on for, engaging in 1,000 distractions, passing notes, he says, or doing crossword puzzles in our heads. I wonder if any of us are doing crossword puzzles this evening. In all of these actions, we're not entering into the sanctuary, into the Holy of Holies, with a sense of expectation and hope. Passionate worship is about bringing ourselves in complete gratitude for all we know and experience of the love of God in our lives. It shouldn't be about coming to receive, but should be about us coming before our God in full and complete love and gratitude for who He is and for what He shares with us. It shouldn't be a spectator activity. Worship is impacted by what we bring to it, and it affects us all. Passionate worship begins with each individual who is worshipping. Have we prepared for worship? Have we opened ourselves up to experience God? Have we said that this time is not about us as individuals, but it's first about God, and secondarily, about all of us as a collective body? What we bring to worship will impact our worship experience. If we open ourselves up, then Schnees says an hour of passionate worship changes all the other hours of the week. Worship leaves people challenged, sustained and led by the Spirit of God, and it changes how they view themselves and their neighbours. Do we have a palpable sense of expectancy as we come to worship each week, I wonder? Here we can think about the words from that passage from Isaiah, where he found out something new about worship. He'd been going regularly to the temple, but for that moment he found out that it wasn't about habit, or he wasn't there to be entertained. He discovered that worship is about an encounter with God. He sees God in a way he has never seen him before. Passionate worship is the kind of worship that takes you to a new place where we can see God differently than we have ever seen God before. And in worship of God, Isaiah came face to face with the weaknesses in his life. He says, "I'm a man of unclean lips," as he came face to face with the Almighty, the Holy One. He was completely focused on God, the Exalted One. However, what else did he experience in that moment? Well, he experienced the complete grace of God. His guilt was stripped away, and that slate was wiped clean forever. We come in gratitude to our Jesus, the one in whom we're set free from guilt and loved with an everlasting love. As we come in passionate worship, we open ourselves up to God, discovering in the process that God is opening us up. We see the world and the needs of the world differently. We see the needs of our neighbours differently. We see those who are different differently. I believe that as we see differently, we worship passionately, and it stirs our very souls. We encounter God and come to know how much God loves us, and we wait to see what God is going to do in our lives. Some words that I very much liked and wanted to include in this service. Every congregation, large and small, is a tapestry of hope and hurt, a collage of experience and anticipation, a patchwork quilt of gifts, needs, fears and aspirations. People come to connect to God and one another, as well as to feel restored, reminded, remembered and refreshed. As we gather as God's people in worship, may we gather with longing and hope. May we gather with hearts prepared and open and minds engaged with the expectation of an encounter with God, so that we're better equipped for passionate worship, ready to shower God with all the love that we feel, engaging all our heart, all our soul, all our mind and all our strength, as we join more fully, more completely and more passionately in the dance of faith. Amen.